Okay. Oh yeah, so there's a jump drive going around for anybody who's got Windows that's got all the assignments on it. You can copy it over. Did anybody in here who's on Mac have a problem finally getting their assignment files copied over? It will work on your computer as well. So just get that thumb drive and plug it in. We've got to get it. We've got to get it. Was everybody able to at least get to the server and just had problems then? Okay, so the only reason I care about that is that the thumb drive will give you all the assignments, so you'll have everything that you need for that. But I need to make sure you can get to the server to put in your homework 2 weeks from now. So we'll get to that. If there's problems, there's a workaround that we can get to, but hopefully there's not going to be any problems doing that stuff. So anyway, back in Photoshop. And in my case, yeah, I'm going to quit Photoshop. I plugged in an external hard drive, and I want to get back to it so that I can show you how to change scratch disks to set them up so you can actually use an external hard drive as a scratch disk. Okay, so I have now plugged in. We're back at the scratch disk window here. You'll see in my case I've got 4 hard disks on here. I have 4 separate hard disks that are attached to this computer right now. I'll show you what they look like. It's these 3 right here, which are internal hard drives, and then this is the external one that I just plugged in right here. This is actually the class server that we're working on. This is where the Dropbox is and that kind of stuff. So that's not a legitimate hard drive, but these others actually are. So for me, in a Macintosh world, if you go to the Applications folder and you scroll down to the bottom to the Utilities folder, and inside the Utilities folder, there's a thing called Disk Utility. If you double click on that, this is where you can actually format your hard drives and do other things right here. Some of the people who are using LaCie's right now, it seems like that's where we're having the problem, is they've actually got their hard drives are formatted to work on Windows. Now, Macintosh is very good about reading and writing to a hard drive that's formatted for a Windows environment. It does not work the other way around. Windows cannot read anything that's formatted for Macintosh without special software. But at any rate, Photoshop is not recognizing their external hard drives in a Macintosh environment because they are formatted for Windows. So if I click on mine right here, you can see mine. This one's actually formatted as a Mac OS Extended. There's different formatting systems that you can go through. You can still format for MS-DOS. You can format for an expanded one, which was called FAT-DOS. And anyway, it goes on and on and on. For Macintosh, there's 2 primary ones right now. There's OSS Extended, and then there's a new version of theirs that is called APFS, Apple File System, which is the new version of it. You can see it's right here. So all of these are just ways to set up a hard drive so that it can be read. But what we care about, once you get it readable by your computer, is that when you are in Photoshop now, you can actually change what disk is used as your scratch disk. Now in my case, and it's the case on everybody's, whatever starts your hard drive, your computer up, whatever boots your computer is by default picked as the scratch disk. So you can see mine, instead of mine being called Macintosh HD, which is what most of them are, I've renamed it 2020 Macintosh HD. It's set up as the scratch disk. However, I can come down here, and this is my external 1 terabyte hard drive right here. I can click on this to actually enable it. And what will happen now, if I don't do anything else, what will happen is that it will write to my 2020 Macintosh HD until that hard drive gets full, and then it will actually start to write to my external 1 terabyte hard drive right here. That's not what I want. I actually wanted to write to my external and leave my internal one by itself. So to change that, you select the one that you've got and you use these arrows and you can pop it up now. And now you can see that the Versa external 1 terabyte is the #1 scratch disk, which means that my computer will start writing to this scratch disk. When it gets full, then it'll start going to my internal one, and so on and so on and so on. This is a protection, which is great. The downside to this is that the bus that connects your internal hard drive to your computer is infinitely faster than anything that you can do externally. So while this might solve the scratch disk is full problem, this slows everything down for me because it's got to go through a USB cable, which is extremely slow, unlike your internal hard drive, which is wired to the circuit board inside of your computer. So your better move in this is to get enough files off of your internal hard drive to really be able to use it as an effective scratch disk, and then use your external hard drive to store all the shit that you took off. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so at any rate, if you do this though and you want it to actually happen, one of the caveats about this is that you need to restart Photoshop for this to take effect. If you just were to say okay right now, none of this would have changed yet. When you restart Photoshop, this will then go into effect. For me, I'm not going to do that. And we are going to continue on. Cursors, next thing down. This part's, yes, sorry. Again, yours is probably, are you on a Macintosh right now? Yeah. Yours is probably like 2 other people over here. It's probably formatted for Windows. Oh. So we can fix that. We can change that, but that's not something for us to tackle right now. So if that's happening to you, all the people who've got external hard drives that are not showing up in the scratch disk part right here, if you want to stay after class, we will move out into a common area so that they can clean this classroom, and we will talk about how to resolve that, and if we need to get together sometime out of class to actually get it resolved, because you would be better off, if you're only in a Mac environment, you're better off having everything Mac. If you're only in a Windows environment, you're better off having everything Windows. You don't, even though things are designed to work in both worlds, they don't work in them very well. Okay, so we're getting there, guys. Next thing down in your preferences is cursors, and this part's critical. In the radio buttons down here, you want to select normal brush tip. You don't want to do a full-size brush. And the reason you don't do a full-size brush is that if you have a brush that's actually a very soft brush, it starts to go out to be transparent at the very end. If you click full-size brush, it puts the diameter, the circle around your brush at that very edge. And the truth of it is, at that very edge, you've actually, the opacity of your brush has reached 0. So the brush you think you have will not work the way you think it should. It will always be much, much, much smaller. So that's why you want to pick normal brush tip. It will function like you think it should function. You definitely want to check add crosshair at the brush tip. This actually, we do very precise work here. It gives you an exact center of your brush. That part matters. In the other cursors over here, I don't know about you, but I don't like the little bucket or the little eyedropper or all that shit. You want precise cursors. Basically what those will do then is that when you go to use like the clone stamp tool or a brush or any of that kind of stuff, whatever, it gives you an exact size crosshair. You know exactly where you're going. And if you're starting to do really specific cloning and you need one spot to land in another spot exactly, you can't do that with your cursor looking like a rubber stamp. Brush preview you can leave as it is right now. The next one down, transparency and gamut. The only thing that I change in here is the color of the gamut warning. By default, it's a middle gray. Gamut warning is telling you what color or tone in your image is outside of a particular color space. Primarily, people use this for, you've got an image on your computer which has got a huge, huge, huge color gamut, but you're going to go print it out. And the printer has a much smaller range of colors to be able to do that with. So when you click on gamut warning, it can show you the colors that the printer cannot print. The problem is that if it's a neutral middle gray, it's very hard to see. You want this color to be a warning, shocking, fluorescent-y color. So to fix that, simply double click on the color. It'll bring open the color picker. And with the color picker open, you'll see there's a series of radio buttons on the sort of kind of next to the column that say RGB. You want to make sure that 0, so if you click into the R value, I just select the value, type in 0, hit the tab key, it will move you to the very next color, the green, put in 255, hit the tab key and go down to blue and put in 0 and say okay. That gives you a pure green, and that color is really easy to see on anything except for a pure green image. Next thing down, rulers. This part doesn't matter as much in the sense that how to say this. Typically, when people look at their screen, you know in a Photoshop you've actually got a zoom value that sits down at the bottom, and it will say your image is zoomed in to 50% or it's zoomed into 100% or whatever. If you wanted to actually be able to put a ruler down onto your screen and have those numbers all match up exactly, then you would change the value that you've got here of your screen resolution. By default, it's always 72, but there hasn't been a computer monitor with a default with a 72 pixel per inch resolution made in 15 years. The ones that you've got right now are probably closer to, well, you can actually figure it out, but they're probably closer to 120. You can leave these as they are, or if you're really crazed about numbers and that kind of stuff, tap me and I'll show you how to actually change this and what it should actually be changed for. The rest of this can be left at its default, and you can simply say OK to that, and we're done with most of what we are doing. Unfortunately, what should be a preference is not a preference, and it's stuck someplace else, and it's arguably the single most important thing we're going to talk about today. For Macintosh people, I think for Windows people, you're still in the preferences off the edit menu. But for the Macintosh people, you come over to the edit menu. They stole this from Windows. Come to the edit menu all the way down to color settings. Don't ask me why they put this here, but they did. Anyway, when color settings open up, this controls what working spaces and the interaction between working spaces that Photoshop uses. Now, if you're not familiar with what a working space is, don't worry, we're going to get into that. But basically what we're talking about is spaces of color. That's what we're really dealing with here. And the problem is that, and I'm going to ask all of you when you opened yours up, in the settings up at the very top, you have a drop-down menu. What is your set at? Yeah, North American General Purpose 2, right? And if you look at RGB, does it say sRGB? Yeah. So what that is now saying is that if you bring a file into Photoshop, the biggest amount of color that you can actually have it handle is sRGB, which is roughly the color space of a printer. It takes all of the beautiful color that your camera can capture and throws a ton of it away. It gets worse. There's all sorts of profile mismatches about this, warnings that would tell you that that's the problem. They're all turned off. This is a compromise that Adobe made with Microsoft, and everybody has been screaming about it for the last 20 years. You need to change this. In the drop-down menu, you need to go from North American General Purpose 2 to North American Pre-Press 2. And when that happens, what you will actually get is your RGB will change to Adobe RGB. How many people in this room are familiar with Adobe RGB? Just the phrase, the term, any part of it. How many people in this room are familiar with ProPhoto RGB? Do you use ProPhoto RGB? Okay. We will talk about why that is, what about it is you could, why you would, why you wouldn't, that kind of stuff akin here. I don't want people, a lot of people will just say, well, you should work in Adobe RGB. That's bullshit to me. If I'm going to tell you why to do something, I damn well better be able to tell you why I'm telling you to do that, don't you think? You can't just say, oh, use this. For me, that's just wrong. If I can say to you, okay, you can do this, this, or this, but this is why I do this, and you agree, then that's a different matter. But you might not agree. You might say, well, I would prefer to do that. Anyway, I'm just saying, this will actually set things up right. Most importantly are the profile mismatches and missing profile. These are all now turned on, so if there is a color issue, it'll actually be flagged and you will not do damage to your file. Here's the problem. With yours set up the way it was, in the old version where it had sRGB as your color space and all of these warnings turned off, you could have had a file that was in Adobe RGB and you could load it onto your computer, and the minute you opened it up, it would be converted to sRGB, which throws away an enormous amount of its color, and it doesn't tell you it's doing it. And then when you save the file, that's baked. You can never get those colors back. That to me is like giving the baby the hand grenade. Okay. You can go ahead and say okay to this part right here. And then finally, one last one, up to the edit menu again, down to toolbar. In the toolbar, you can actually customize this toolbar. Now, I would suggest right now at the beginning, you actually save it at its defaults. If you haven't done anything in this space, then nothing will change. But this is a way you can edit your toolbar. You can move stuff around. So let's say I never use the magnetic lasso tool. You can see it's the magnetic lasso tool. It's right here. Let me cancel out of this. It's sitting right here, magnetic lasso tool. If I didn't want that tool there, I can actually edit it using, again, this toolbar editor. And I could come take the magnetic lasso tool and I could pull it back out and say done to here. And now when I kick this out, it's no longer there. So you can move stuff around. There are some people that like, for instance, your healing tools. So if you click on in this case, mine are all separate here. They've separated them out. I don't like the process. So I've got the spot healing brush tool is here, the healing brush tool is here, and the patch tool is here. I prefer to keep them in one that has a flyout menu. So again, I can actually do that in the toolbar by coming down, and this is the three of them that are separated right here. I can put them together and say done. And now I've got a single tool with a flyout menu. So that's just a way to control those guys. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that part. Again, we're not finished yet. Come back up to the edit menu, down to keyboard shortcuts. And in keyboard shortcuts, this is I think an important one. How many of you guys, well, you guys have been working in Photoshop for quite some time, right? Most of you? They changed this about a year ago. It used to be that if you wanted to do undo in Photoshop, you did something, you hit Command Z and it undid it. And if you hit Command Z again, it didn't go back in history, it came forward, and it would just flip back and forth between those two states. In order to go back in history, you actually had to add the Option key. You would hit Command Option Z. They changed that in recent versions of Photoshop. It drove everybody nuts. So everybody now clicks on this Use Legacy Undo Shortcuts unless you like the new method. I hate the new method. So for me, it's just a natural. So that's actually how I do my my part for this. So that's the last thing that I wanted to point out to you. Photoshop and all the improvements that they've done, they have given us the ability to undo damn near all of them. Okay, and then you can simply set OK here to do that part, and we are reasonably good to go. Are there questions about any of this so far? Okay, what happens when everything fucks up? You need to write this down. So, if you need to reset the let's say something is going horribly wrong in Photoshop for you. You hit the brush and you get the clone stamp tool instead. Or you've got a foreground color that's red and you start to paint with it and you get purple or something. It's just something is wrong. You need to reset your preferences. The way you reset your preferences is this, and I want you to do it all with me, but then we're not going to hit the reset button. We're going to just get up to that point and then stop, because otherwise all the work that you just did is going to be thrown away and it's going to go back to its defaults. So, but if there is behavior that's just weird and you need to fix, you need to reset, quit Photoshop. So I'm simply going to quit Photoshop. I'm also quitting my disk utility. Okay, so it's 2 different keyboard shortcuts for this part right here. You need to have Photoshop, you need to have the icon visible. Do not start Photoshop yet. If you've started it, quit it again, because we need to hold down a keyboard shortcut before we launch Photoshop. So if you are on Windows, you hold down the Alt key, the Control key, and the Shift key, and then click on Photoshop icon to start it. But make sure you're holding those 3 keys down before you start Photoshop. So again, Windows, Alt, Control, Shift. For Macintosh, it's Option, Command, Shift. So again, before you start Photoshop, hold down Command, Option, Shift, and click on Photoshop to launch it. And you will get this dialog that says, do you want to delete Photoshop settings file? And if you were having problems, you would say yes. Do not say yes right now because you're not having problems, and that will get rid of all the work we just did. Instead, hit no. But that's the way you would actually reset Photoshop to actually have it work better for you. Okay. I do want to build this custom workspace. To be perfectly honest with you, I've done this a lot. I've had people fight this workspace for a while, but ultimately give in. There's a lot of hidden features to this that make it extremely worthwhile to use for retouching. Now, you can have multiple workspaces in Photoshop. So just because we're going to build this one, and I'm going to suggest you use it for retouching, does not necessarily mean, let's say if you wanted to edit film in Photoshop, there's different workspaces for film. If you take a look at your Windows menu up at the very top, and you click on this menu and you come down to Workspace, you will see that there's a series of canned workspaces that Photoshop offers you. There is the essential default one, a 3D space, which they are getting rid of because they're getting rid of 3D in Photoshop. Motion, again, for video editing. Painting really has more to do with, again, graphic, tablet, more gesture stroke painting stuff. What they call photography, questionable. Graphic arts and webs, if you're a web designer. It just gives you tools and layouts that you're more likely to use if you're doing these functions. For me, though, I'm going to build this custom one. And so for you guys to do it, again, you're not going to lose any space that you've got. I want you to start with the Essentials default workspace, so we're all starting on the same page. So if you click on the Essentials, you'll see that your screen changes. However, when you do this kind of work, it's really critical that you know this. Resetting a workspace in Photoshop is a 2-step process. That was only step number 1. Step number 2 is to go right back to the same thing, up to the window menu, down to Workspace, and come down to Reset Essentials. This reset button will change depending on what workspace you've actually selected. So if I'd selected photography, this would say Reset Photography. If I'd selected painting, it would say Reset Painting. I've actually selected Default Essentials, so that's why it says that. Pick this guy again, and you will actually see there was a shift that just happened in this. This is now the default space that Photoshop actually ships with. And it's the place that we need to actually start. The next thing that we need to do, and by default this is usually on Windows, I'm not even sure you can turn this off, but in Macintosh you can. Go back up to the Windows menu again and look down at the very bottom. You need to make sure that Application Frame is checked. If it's unchecked, like mine is right now, you'll see what ends up happening is you actually see through the workspace here. And until I pull an image up here, I'm looking at what's going on back behind my image right here. Not only that, if I try to move any of these color palettes, they all move independent of each other. If I enable the application frame, now I can move. When I move the workspace, everything moves with it. All of the palettes are anchored to it, which is how you want this ultimately to be. Now, if I drag my workspace down a little bit like this, so it's not filling my whole screen, this works different on different Macintoshes. So, and I'm sure it works different on different Windows machines as well. For me, the shortcut to actually fill this back up, to fill my whole screen, is to simply double click right on this area right next to the word Adobe Photoshop. If I double click really fast, it refills my entire screen. That's a great shortcut. Hopefully yours does that. If it doesn't do that, then you've actually got to put this thing into place. But nonetheless, this is where we're going to start with our whole show right here. So what we really need are the things that we care about in Photoshop for retouching that can be visible to us all of the time. The trick to doing this, though, is that right now we have palettes that are anchored to the application frame. It's almost impossible to anchor a palette to the frame. So we need to work with the ones that are already anchored. We're going to change things around, but it might seem a little confusing, but that's why we're doing it the way we're actually going to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is start over here at this little icon that's sitting up at the very top. The little one that's on this little column right here. If you click on it, it is the History palette. And if you click on it, you will see that the word flies out. You get a tab that says History. If you grab the word tab that says History and tear this off and bring it over into sort of the middle area on the other side, we needed to get rid of that guy. The next thing that I'm going to do is the same thing with the Color tab. I'm going to click on the Color tab and I'm going to drag this out into the middle of my workspace and let go. When you can do that, you'll see that it's no longer a part of the tab that's at the very top, and there's a little X up at the very top. You need to click on that little X. It gets rid of it. Now, if you made a mistake and you said, oh, fuck, I really didn't mean to get rid of that guy, simply come up to your window menu, and all of the things that we are working, all of the palettes are listed here. So you could actually come back to Color and bring it right back in again. And if you wanted it anchored back into the tab again as another tab along the very top, again, grab the tab itself, drag it over, and when you see the blue line go around the entire thing, that's telling you that this is actually going to be added to it as a tab in this palette, in the palette space. And if you let go, you'll see it's right here. However, nobody uses color like this, so drag it out again and kill it. I'm going to do the same thing with patterns, kill it. I'm going to do the same thing with gradients, kill it. Now, before we do swatches, which I am going to get rid of, I actually need to move properties up and anchor it to the top of my application tab. So what I want you to do is grab the properties tab that's right down here and drag it up into its right next to swatches. And you will see, again, I get the little blue line that's going all the way around it, and let go. It is now part of that upper part. Then I can grab swatches and tear it off and get rid of it. I had to go through that whole minutia in order to get properties anchored to the top of my application frame, which is where you want to ultimately keep it. How are we doing? Everybody good? Okay. I'm going to actually do the exact same trick. Well, first off, let's get rid of libraries. I'm going to drag libraries out and get rid of that. How many of you guys use the adjustment tab, this little guy right here? You're never going to use it again. And the reason you're never going to use it again is that real estate in Photoshop, you never have enough of it, ever, especially if you're working on a laptop. If you come down to the, you won't be able to see this right now, but just look up at my screen. I'm going to show this to you really quickly. I'm going to just create a quick file. With a file created, I've got an adjustment. This is my layers tablet, my layers palette right here. At the very bottom of my layers palette, I've got this icon that looks like a circle, half black, half white. If I click on that, it flies open. Every single adjustment that you can have on that adjustment tab is sitting right here, but it takes up no space. So I'm not getting rid of your adjustments. I'm just saying there's a better place to actually invoke them from, because that gives us a lot more room for our layers palette, which is what you really want to see. There are people in this class who have actually hit 300, 400, 500 layers in an image. You need that space. You don't need adjustments. Does that make sense, everyone? All right. So again, if you hate it, you can always go back and put it back in. But for me, I'm going to grab my layers palette and drag it up and anchor it into adjustments. And then I'm going to grab adjustments and tear it out and get rid of it. I'm going to then grab paths and drag it up and anchor it as well with layers. And then click on layers to make it the active one, because when we save this workspace, anything that we have tabbed like layers and paths, anything that's actually in the foreground is the visible one. When we save the workspace, it will always be the visible one. And since more often than not we're working with layers more than paths, you want to actually have the layers as be the top one up. Channels, we're simply going to click and pull out into the middle of our space. This side now is made exactly the way we ultimately want to make it. This is exactly what I'm looking for. You can change. I don't need this much property space. I need more room for it to see my path. So if you hover your cursor right over the middle where the properties palette touches the layers palette, you'll see that you get a double-headed arrow. If you click, you can drag this up or down, and I typically drag it. I usually do about a 2/3 to 1/3, roughly in that space right there. And that's the way I set this guy ultimately up. Okay, I'm going to pull history back into the middle a little bit, just so that I've got some room to work on the other side over here. So on the other side, there's a palette that's missing that we actually need to have available to us the whole time. So to get to it, come up to the Windows menu and come down to Info. And a palette will actually anchor itself over here next to the column side. It creates that column. That is not where I want to keep it. I'm going to grab the Info tab. I'm going to drag it all the way over to the other side. And what you're looking for is, do you see that blue line? When I get really close to it, that blue line is telling me it's going to anchor to the toolbar, which is exactly where I want it. And I'm going to let go. However, you'll notice when I do that, it expands down here completely. And I actually need to put my history and my channels underneath this. So this is the only real tricky part here. Normally you would think with history, you could grab history and drag it down here underneath the bottom. That's not where you actually do it. Where you do it is, you see this line that is dividing that info palette? There's a dark line right there. That's actually the anchor line. So grab your history and drag it right underneath that. When you, again, get the blue line that's telling you it's going to anchor there, and let go, and now you'll actually see your history, your info tab is now all the way up. Your history is now occupying all of this. However, I need my channel underneath the history. So this time you actually do drag it down to the bottom. So grab your channels, bring it down underneath the bottom of your history palette. Even though it's going out of my frame, I can still see the blue line, and let go. And I've now got info followed with history underneath it and channels. Now this history's got, it's pretty deep, so I'm going to again hover my cursor right where the history palette meets the channel tab, get the double-headed arrow, and I'm going to goose this up a little bit so that I can see a little bit more of my channels. Yes? Grab the, don't grab the top, grab the tab itself.
This part?
Uh-huh. And let go. Okay. And you're good. And so again, this one's now got to go under that line. Yep.
So we're supposed to grab
not the top of it, the tab itself. Even though these will move, this will actually allow you to move it around. It won't do the anchoring. You got to grab the tab.
What if when we grab the tab, you still don't get the blue line?
As long as it anchors and you get the blue line, you're good to go.
I said, what if you don't get the blue line?
Then you're not grabbing the tab. Right? The actual word.
Right, yeah. I'm clicking on like info.
Yeah.
And it doesn't like get the blue line.
Yeah, so pull it over next to the tool tab. Keep going. Keep going. Slow it down. Here, let me see really quick. Oh, there it was. Wow, this is super hypersensitive.
Oh.
Yeah, they don't make this easy. How many people in this room are angry at Adobe? Oh, I rant about them. Fuckers. Okay, last thing, guys, we're almost there. Last thing. We need to add one more tab to this that we don't have yet. So up to your Windows palette, down to Actions. And Actions, when it comes in, it's automatically tabbed along with History, which is where it belongs. However, you want to click on History tab to keep it in the foreground to save our space now so that it is actually, this is where we want it, here. Now the reason that this all becomes important, well, let's save this workspace first. So to save the workspace, come up to the window menu. Did everybody get this workspace? Are we good? Okay. Come up to the window menu. Come down to Workspace, down to New Workspace, and name it. I call mine, I think mine's called Retouching 23. I've done so many of these, I don't know. Name yours whatever you want it, but make a name meaningful. Don't call it, you know, Freddy's Toy or something. That's not going to have any meaning for you. Call it your Retouching Workspace or your, you know, whatever. Anyway, and click the word Save once you've actually done that. So, go out to your Finder. Again, I apologize to the Windows people because I don't know how to do this one. It's a way to actually, you probably can do a file search for the file that you just saved. If you are on Macintosh, come out to your Finder. And if you come up to your Go menu on a Macintosh and you take a look at the drop-down menu, it's the same one that we use to connect to the server. You'll notice that there's no library on here. And I don't know why Apple's hidden the user library. It's where all things like this space that we just made are kept. But they've made it invisible for us. To be able to see it, you hold down either the Option key or the Shift key. It's different depending on the computer you've got. So hold down either Option or Shift and you will see Library shows up in the middle of it. Once that happens, go ahead and let go and you will actually see you've now got a window that is your library. There's all sorts of weird things in here like game kits and fonts and all that kind of, anyway. Up at the very top, you'll see the word library with a little icon of a folder next to it. If you don't want to have to remember that shortcut to get to this library, simply grab that folder and drag it over into your favorites sidebar over here and let go. And forevermore, it will be right there. It'll be here in every single Finder window that you open. And then all you need to do is click on this and you'll be good to go. So what I'm trying to do is actually get to the file that we just built to save that workspace so that you don't ever have to make it again. So to do this with me, please, I need everybody to go back to our website, to the Canvas site. I need to go to the modules page. I need to go up to course resources. This is where I think it is. Nope, it's going to be in session 1, resources. In session 1, resources, right here in the middle, it says Photoshop CC preference locations. This will tell you any preference that you build in Photoshop. If you want to save it, it'll tell you where it is. And it will tell you for Windows as well, so you guys will be able to find the Windows one. If you click on the preference location and it says that this service is currently unavailable, you got to be fucking kidding me. What? Canvas has been really, really wonky today. Anyway, start to scroll down, and what we're actually looking for is custom workspaces. So if you'll see as you start to go down, it'll give you the OS version of it, where your general settings are, all of that. This general settings, by the way, the path to get to this is a smart thing to save. All the work that we just did when we set up our scratch discs and our tools and the cursor colors and the brush tip shape and all of that kind of stuff, you can actually pull that file out right now and save a copy of it. And if everything goes haywire, you throw away the haywire version of it, put this guy back in, and you don't have to reset your preferences again. Does that make sense? So to find that, we might as well go there. For the people who are on Windows, continue to scroll down. There's the Windows version of it is right down here. So for the Windows people, this is what you're looking for right here. You're looking for your username, app data, blah, 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 blah. For the Macintosh people, this is going to be in Library, under Preferences, under Photoshop CC Settings. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm in my Library. I'm going to go down to Preferences. I'm going to go to tune it up. The preferences to Photoshop 2021 settings right here, and inside 2021 settings go all the way down to the bottom to oh, that's not actually where I want to go. It's this file right here. This guy right here. So this Adobe Photoshop 2021 preferences. You don't want to drag this out because you'll lose it, but if you drag it out, I'm going to make a copy of it onto my desktop. So I'm going to drag it to my desktop, hold down the Option key, and you'll get the little plus sign, and you can make a copy of it. That just made a copy of that file on my desktop. So now if everything goes haywire, I can actually take that file and put it right back in that spot, and everything will be set up again. I'm also going back to that very same place and going down to the bottom now to Workspaces. And in Workspaces, again, mine's Retouching 23. You should find the one that you actually found there. Yes?
I'm not seeing the library folder on mine.
Okay, so to get to the library, go up to your Go menu, click on it. I know. Just can you click it? Do you get a drop down under the Go menu?
Okay, now just let me get that.
Right, and then hold down either the Option key or the Shift key. No, I'll show you. You're okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Oh yeah. Okay. So you're there. So hold down Option key. It's right there. So click on Library.
Okay.
Good.
And do I drag it over?
No. Click on it. That wasn't the library. That was something else. Go back up to the Go menu again. Come down. Hold down the Option key. Click on Library. Let go. This is your library right now, and you're in full window mode. So push your cursor all the way up to the top. Come over to File. Let's go to Edit. Let's go over to Finder. Let's go to View. Exit full screen. Okay, see the library right there? Grab that little icon and drag it over into your favorites. And you can get there forever now. Just let go.
Okay.
And then when you click on that, you'll be good.
I think I have a time issue. I have library up, but it's not.
Okay, so
I want to go. Am I in the wrong thing? Because it's saying library.
yeah, you are not in the right place. There's more than one library.
Okay.
So go to the Go menu, hold down the Option key, click on that library.
That's how I got here.
Okay, fine. Go back up to the very top, come to View, down to Exit Full Screen. Grab this little library icon. Nope, the icon.
Oh, the icon.
Click on the, literally on the folder,
Oh, wait.
on the little folder, blue
Okay.
folder, and drag it over here to your favorites. Don't put it in it, just let go. And it's there. Every now and time you need to get there, just click on the library. Anyway, Go down to Workspaces inside of your preferences of your library, and you'll find the custom preference that you just made. Copy that to your desktop as well, and then you don't have to make it ever again. So I'm just, again, going to drag this to my desktop. Hold down the Option key to make a copy of it. And then if I go look at my desktop, you can actually see, let me just go to my desktop so you can really see it. There's two files right here. There's this one. This is my Adobe preference file. This is all the settings that we did for color settings, for our cursor sizes, for the transparency, for our scratch disk. All of that kind of stuff is saved in this file. And then this is your workspace right here. So you can actually take both of these files, go to any other computer in the world, and drop them inside those respective spots on that machine, and your Photoshop will look identical to the way it's set up right now. Make sense? Okay. Looking for the crowd to go wild here. I'm getting nothing.
How did you get it to be there again?
I just copied them from their location inside the library to the desktop.
Right, which is inside the Adobe folder, and then...
Nope. So go to, did you get to the library?
Yeah.
So go from the library down to the preference folder.
Mm-hmm.
Not preference pane, but preference folder. Then inside, it depends on your version of Photoshop. Mine is 2021, but you're looking for Adobe Photoshop, whatever your version is, settings. Mine's 2021 settings. If you're on 2022, it'll be 2022 settings. You see it?
Yes.
Click on that. Then the file that you're looking for that is all the preferences for how it is set up is at the very top, Adobe Photoshop. It'll have the whatever year. Prefs, P-R-E-F-S, .psp. Drag that out onto you want to make a copy. Don't drag it out because it'll remove it and then you'll lose it. Simply drag it out onto your desktop. Hold down the Option key, and that will give you a little plus sign, which means you're making a copy of it.
Okay, so hold the Option key while I drag it. That way it'll be a copy of that.
Exactly. And then scroll down to the very bottom of that there's two things down. Workspaces and Workspaces modified. And I don't know why. I always think that the custom ones should be in modified, but they usually show up in the one that just says Workspaces. And you want to do the same thing. You want to make a copy of that. So click on it and drag it out onto your desktop, holding down the Option key to make a copy, and you're good to go. Okay. How much fun was that? Okay.
Because I have I have 4 Adobe buildings. So I'm in preferences, and then I have all these Adobes.
Right. So if you drag, again, this full screen is killing you. If you double click on this, it opens up,
Okay.
and you're looking for the latest, greatest one, which I guess is this one, because you're not working in CS6 anymore.
No.
That's the file that you want to copy to your desktop for all your settings, right? And then oh, sorry. It should be in there. Oh, here, it's up at the top. You've got this sorted somehow differently. It's not being sorted by name. It's not alphabetical. It's right here. Is that the one you, yep, that's one. Those are the two files you would copy to your desktop. And then a lot of people will simply put them on a thumb drive and keep it in their computer bag, and that way you can set it up for anybody. Okay, there are questions about this. Versa, please, let's do something better than this. You promised me something. Okay. We'll see if we can get through this part. Okay, so I'm going to make apologies right now. Remember I told you about the sort of active thing is a much better way to learn. The whole lecture part is a horrible way to learn. unfortunately, we've got to do the first part of color. I'm going to try to keep the color, I'm trying to break the color theory lectures up a little bit so that they don't kill you. So I'm trying to keep these relatively short, so just keep that in mind. But we've got to start on this part because this part's actually critical. So yeah, okay. Okay, I need everybody to fire Photoshop up though. We are going to do a little bit of work in Photoshop just so that you guys can sort of make references and some visual references to what I'm really talking about. So fire Photoshop up and then actually watch this screen for just a second. So we are going to start talking about RGB and CMY. K is in the parentheses here. We'll talk about why that is in just a second. These are tri-stimulus descriptions of color. That's a don't let the terms and don't worry about math. How many people in this room can add 2 and 2? How many can subtract 4 from 1? No, that's a joke. How many can subtract 4 from 10? How many can multiply 2 times 3? How many can divide 10 into 30? You have all the math that you need for this class. So don't get flipped out about it. I'm not throwing a ton of math at you. There's a little bit at times, but it's not going to be insane. So anyway, tri-stimulus just means 3 stimuli of color. That's all it actually means. This was a set of experiments that was done back in the 1700s. There was a very famous scientist whose name I'm not going to remember, who realized that you have 2 types of cells in your eyeballs, rods and cones. The rods are basically where light enters the edges of your eyes, and it's primarily, it deals with motion. So you guys notice that you things will, like, car will like dart by you, outside of your vision, and you're not really sure it's a car, but you know that there's something moving. You actually pick up on that. That's actually a rod is actually doing that part. It doesn't deal with detail or color really well. It deals with motion really well. And it's a protective mechanism. However, in the center of your eyes are cones. And that's where you get detail, and it's where you also get color. And they did a whole series of experiments, and they realized, or they discovered, that part of those cones are sensitive to red light, part are sensitive to blue light, and part are sensitive to green light. And that's where we come up with RGB. RGB, this whole model of RGB is based on human vision. This isn't some wacko scientist from NASA that decided to do this, whatever. It's how we really see. And there's a lot to be said for that part. A lot about cameras, a lot about all the system, about the way cameras work, about the way film works, about all of that kind of stuff. They're all modeled on human vision. And color is no different. So if you take a look at this illustration that we've got right here, what you can see is that there is a masking screen right here, and there's a person who can look through a slit in this. Inside this slit, there's a wall here, a white wall, and there's a shelf that comes out that keeps the light from here hitting the top and the lights from up here hitting down on the bottom. They turn on this target light right here, and you can see it's sort of a purplish color. And then you've got a red light, a green light, and a blue light here, and they're all on rheostats so that you can control the amount of RGB. And they let the guy play around with the rheostats, and sure enough, when he gets them right, what you find is that you can emulate this target color by using varying amounts of red, green, and blue. Does this make sense to everyone? At its core, every color that we see can be made up of 3 primaries, red, green, and blue, just in varying amounts. So, for instance, If I had 100% blue, no green, and no red, it would be a blue light. If I had 100% green, 100% blue together and no red, it would actually be a cyan light. We'll look at that in just a second. So anyway, I'm just saying that's where this all comes from. It starts with additive primaries. The additive primaries are red, green, and blue. Cyan, magenta, and yellow are the secondary colors. So you need to imagine these as projectors. So imagine this is a light, like a slide projector or a movie projector or whatever. One of them is only projecting blue light, one is only projecting red, and one's only projecting green. Where the green and the red overlap, you get the secondary color yellow. Where the red and the blue overlap, you get the secondary color magenta. Where the blue and the green overlap, you get the secondary color cyan. And where all three of them overlap, you get neutral gray. At maximum intensity, this neutral gray is white. Does this make sense, everybody? Okay, it's an emissive technology. You need to think of a monitor or a projector. Those are where additive primaries work. You start with no light. It's the example that we were looking here of with the black screen here. You start with black, absolutely no light at all, and you start to add light. That's why it's called an additive system, an additive primary system. You start with black. If you add amounts of RGB, you can achieve any color. This is critical. Equal amounts of RGB equal gray. Now, when we talk about gray, it's the entire gamut of tone. It's everything from black to middle gray to white. All of the tones of gray, all the way from black all the way up to white, no matter how many steps of gray you have, they're all grays. Black is a gray, white is a gray. They're all neutral color. Does this make sense? This actual part right here is how we white balance, is based on this very fact that this actually happens. White equals equal amounts of RGB at the maximum intensity. This is a luminosity or a brightness intensity. So how black is black? Again, turn your computer off. That's how black it can be. It can't get darker. Even though you think it can, it can't. The subtractive primaries work in the opposite. So in the subtractive primaries, we have cyan, magenta, and yellow are the primaries. Red, green, and blue are the secondaries. And it works by absorbing light. So why is this thing yellow? Why do you see this as yellow? And I'm putting it here in the white light part. Why does this look yellow to you guys? So white light contains all the colors of the rainbow. What happens, whatever they dyed this thing with, absorbs all of the colors except for this yellow, and it reflects this yellow back. All the other colors are being absorbed, and this is being reflected. That's why we see this as being yellow. This is how all prints work. When you lay ink down on a print, you are laying down pigment that absorbs a certain range of colors, but then reflects others. So if you made a red print, just a red splotch on a white piece of paper, it would be absorbing all of the colors of the rainbow except for red, and it would be reflecting red back out to you, and that's why you see red. Does this make sense, everyone? That's why they call it subtractive. It's the pigment is subtracting colors so that you cannot see them, and you see what is left, what is being reflected back out. Does that make sense? Okay. You start with white. It's the exact opposite. Remember, in an additive system, we started with black. That is not the case in a subtractive system. In a subtractive system, you start with a piece of paper, usually a white piece of paper. You then add inks to them, to subtract light. You can subtract different amounts of RGB for any color. Pure CMYK pigments do not exist. This is the biggest problem in working with CMY. This is why we don't work in a CMYK system. Now, old school film scanners, those guys all worked in CMY, but not us. We work in RGB. Then we convert to CMYK to print. But we work in an RGB world. Equal amounts of CMYK do not equal gray. This is what the biggest problem is. Pigments are real. So I know you guys have heard of indigo blue, alizarin crimson, all of those are real things that exist in the world. They're real chemicals or rocks or stone or powder or something that's been ground up to make pigment. Nobody has been able to find a pure cyan. That's the biggest problem. They've gotten close to magenta and they've gotten close to yellow, but there's simply a pure cyan doesn't exist. And frankly, a pure yellow and a pure magenta don't really exist either, which makes the work that we're trying to do really problematic because it doesn't work in a way that we would think is logically it should work, whereas RGB does. That's why we work in RGB primarily and then convert to CMYK at the end. So you will see here too that black, because of this impurity reason, black is never achieved. If you mix equal amounts of CMY at their maximum intensity, the purest of those inks, and you lay them 100% on top of one another, you do not get black. You get a shitty looking brown. And it's because of the impurities. The way printers get around that is as you start to get darker in color, they start keeping the CMYK inks out and replacing them with true black ink. They simply make a black ink. And you guys have seen it in all of those printers. They've got a whole string of, in the old school ways, it was only 4 colors. It was CMY and K. In offset printing, it still is. If you look at books, doesn't matter how nice the books are, Rizzoli books, whatever, they don't use the multiple inks that we use in an inkjet printer. But it's just an extended version of what we do here. And we have a bunch of blacks. We've got light black and light black and regular black, photo black and matte black and all that. Does this make sense, what's going on? Okay, that's why we actually have black. So how white is white? Your piece of paper. You can't get any whiter than your piece of paper. That's where you start. And then you subtract to get color. Are we good on this part? Okay, standard color wheel. And this is by definition the way it's actually oriented. There's a whole group. You'll hear of the CIE, that kind of stuff. It's a group that started in Paris. I think it was a bunch of old guys just trying to get together and have a good time in Paris. But anyway, it was in the 30s. They decided to really try to tackle color in a way that allowed people to communicate color. Because the problem that how many people in this room ever did a color wheel when you were a kid? Color wheel, you know, in like 5th grade or that kind of stuff, and it was all with paints, and you mixed, you had basically, in those days, you would do yellow, red, and blue, right? Those are the 3 colors, right? Those colors are not technically yellow, red, and blue. There's really, in all honesty, it's yellow, magenta, and cyan. That blue is not really a blue, and that red is not really a red, which has caused all sorts of confusion. But it points to the problem that we have. If I were to say to you, oh, I really like that kind of orangish color, what does that mean to you? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Well, you know orange, but what is orangish? So communicating color became critical, and it's critical for us. So it's not just in our ability to talk to each other about color. When you talk about communicating color, you're talking about communicating color on a monitor to a printer. And if that communication falls down, falls apart, you can't expect your printer to look like your monitor, right? And how many people in this room have that problem? And then the rest of you just don't print, right? All right. So by definition, the way this thing was constructed, our red is always at the 3 o'clock position. It's also in 0 degrees. If we take a look at the wheel, how many degrees are in a circle, a full circle? Oh, humor me. If I'm standing here like this and I go like that, how many degrees did I just turn? 180. If I'm here and I do this, how many degrees did I just turn? There's 360 degrees in a circle, and by definition, that's where hue is actually established. By definition, red is at 0, green is at 120 degrees, and blue is at 240. The way they designed this was so that the primaries were as far from each other as they could be, but equal in their distance. So 360 degrees divided by 3 is 120 in any direction. Make sense? This is going to come up. You're going to see this in work that we do. So at any rate, RGBs are as far as possible from each other. CMY primaries are in between. So you can see when you mix green and red together, you get yellow at the 60-degree mark. Green and blue together give you cyan. Blue and red together give you magenta. And you will also notice, and this is critical, is that the secondaries are actually directly across the color wheel from the primaries in this setup. So, and it is the complementary color. So the opposite of blue is yellow, the opposite of green is magenta, and the opposite of cyan or the opposite of red is cyan, and vice versa. Does that make sense? And why this is important to us is that this represents saturation now. Saturation is the purity of color. The most saturated red is out here on the edge. As I start to add its complementary color, which is cyan, and I start to move in this direction, I start losing the purity of this color. When I get to the very center right here, I have a neutral gray, no color at all. And that happens on all of these axes. Does that make sense to everyone? We good on this part? Okay. We've already talked about all of that. It's critical. Let me re-say this one more time. The most saturated is at the outside edge. The least saturated is right here in the very center. That part is critical for us. What's missing out of this is what we call brightness or lightness. How many people in this room have heard of HSB? Hue, saturation, brightness? We have hue and saturation here. We don't have brightness. That's why you don't see a white here or a black here. In order to do that, we need a three-dimensional space. So I need everybody to open up Photoshop really quickly. I'm going to do this with you. So let me go and see where we're going to start here. Yep. Okay, yeah, with Photoshop open, I need you, if you take a look at the bottom of your toolbar on the side, at the very bottom, are the foreground and background colors. To get them to their defaults, you simply hit the D key. It's one of the shortcuts that I actually use. If you want to flip them, you actually hit the X key. Now, you'll see that there's a little baby icon right above that. That will also get, if you click on that little baby icon, will also default them to black and white. And then there's a double-headed arrow there that if you click on that, it'll flip your foreground colors back and forth between each other. The shortcuts are just simpler to use. Again, the D key defaults them to black and white no matter what color they are, and the X key will flip them back and forth. It doesn't matter to me which one you actually have, but if you actually click on the foreground color, you'll open up the color picker. And once the color picker is open, it doesn't matter what color you actually started out with. That's the color that's actually going to come up here. In the color picker, we have 4 discrete descriptions of color. At the very top, we have HSB. It stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. Underneath it, we've got RGB. That stands for red, green, and blue. On the right side over here at the very top, we've got LAB. And then finally, we've got CMYK. And as long as we're here, I've got actually black as my color. You can see the problem that you run into with CMYK. Unlike RGB, where the numbers are all exactly the same and produce a neutral gray like we talked about, look at the difference in the CMYK. You need 75% cyan ink as opposed to 68 and 67% yellow because cyan is so anemic and so it's so problematic. And then 90% of what makes up that color is black ink. So this is a world of hurt right here. But at any rate, we're going to stick with this part right here. If you click on the radio button for red, so just click on the R button, you will notice that the column right next to it becomes red. And if you actually, so let's all start at the same color. I need everybody to so just click into the R value. So I've just clicked on the R value and type in 0. Hit the tab key, you'll go down to the green, hit 0 again, and the tab key one more time in blue and hit 0 for blue. We're all going to just start with black. And then click on the radio button for R. This column becomes whatever radio button you select. So if we select R, you will actually notice that my R value is at 0 and it appears to be black. In Photoshop, this is actually a true red black. This is a value, even though all blacks look the same. In mathematical version of Photoshop, there is a distinction between a red black, a blue black, and a green black. But anyway, this is a red one. You see the two little arrows that are on the side. If you actually click on those arrows and drag them up, you will notice that this R value begins to increase. And if you go all the way up to the top, you will see that you get to 255. 255 with the 0 green and 0 blue is a pure red. So what we have in Photoshop in an 8-bit image is a scale of 256 possible reds. Does that make sense to everyone? So for instance, this is, I'm going to just drag it down somewhere down here in the middle. This is a red of 137. That's what color that red is with no green and no blue. So we have 256. And you say to me, well, Versa, you don't have 256. You took it all the way to the top. You have 255. You need to remember that 0 is a tone of red as well. So it's 256. Does that make sense to everyone? Take those little sliders and drag it all the way back down. Click on the green, and you'll notice that the column turns to green, and you can do the same thing. There's 256 possible values of green. Finally, blue, same deal, 256 possible versions of that. If you multiply 256 times 256 times 256, which are the ultimate possibilities of this, you end up with 16.7 million colors that these three values can build. Does that make sense? If you leave all of the blue, we'll take the blue all the way up. So drag the blue all the way up to 100, and then click on the green. Just click into the green value here and type in 255. I'm going to put in equal amounts of green and blue at their maximum. You'll see I get cyan. That's the complement of it. That is the combination of those two colors. Remember, if I'm combining blue and green together, if we go back and look, blue and green combined equals cyan. If I combine green and red, we should end up with yellow. Let's see if that actually happens. So I said green and red, so I'm going to type in 255 for my red and 0 for my blue, and boom, I end up with yellow. Is this making sense to everyone, what's going on here? So the reason I bring this up, because this is going to get a little bit more confusing when we get to HSB, is if you're ever having a struggle to remember what these things really represent, come here to the color picker, open it up. Whatever radio button you hit is what the column is going to become. Are we good on that part? If you take them all to 255, you will actually see that, again, we end up with white. Equal amounts of RGB at their maximum intensity make white. If you type in 128 for each one, 128 is halfway between 0 and 255. You have a middle gray. If you type in 100 and let's do, that's never a good sign. Okay, this is bizarre. I've got you guys there, but I'm not here. Okay. And I've changed my screen resolution. Okay, hang on one sec. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Something about my computer is not happy. All right. So, but again, the issue that we've got here is that we're missing lightness or brightness right here. So we've already gone through this. So what is tri-stimulus? So let me start this part again. Guys, don't worry. We're almost getting through this part. So tri-stimulus, all the colors of the spectrum can be described in 3 values or 3 stimuli. In our case, so far, we've looked at RGB. Human eyes are tri-stimulus. They are RGB. They can be plotted in 3 dimensions. They do not have to be primaries, though. So this is an illustration of a cube, and I need everybody to try to imagine this room is this cube. So I'm going to turn on some lights. Again, you won't see this, but you will hear it, unless the recording just died. So imagine this. Look over here at me. Imagine this. What I need you to do is imagine that there's just a cube, not this whole room, but there's just a cube here. So it's however tall this is, it's just as long coming out here and just as long coming out here. It's a perfect cube. It's equal in all dimensions. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so in this corner right down here, we have 0, 0, 0. 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue. If you take a look at this, if we actually go on an axis from this corner right here, straight up to the very top, we don't go anywhere in that direction, we don't go anywhere in this direction, we have 2 pure green. That's 255 greens is up there. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? Then I'm going to come back down here, I'm going to start here, and the one coming out in this direction, along the floor right here, we're not going up, and we're not coming out, up to the edge of this cube right here is 255 blue. Make sense? And then I go all the way back down to 0 blue. Are we good on that part? And then the final one is red. Again, starting here, 0 red. I stay right along the floor. I do not come up at all. I do come out in the room at all. Out here to this corner right here, 255 red. What that allows us to do then is create a 3-dimensional world that allows us to describe color by location. And that's what the people in Paris did. Instead of saying, oh yeah, that's a green blue or a bluish purple or whatever, they gave you a location in a color world, and that location never changed, and it defined color precisely. And it's what we use today. So if I come all the way to this corner, the outside top corner up here, so I'm all the way up, 255 green, I'm all the way out, 255 blue, and I'm all the way over, 255 red. I hit this corner right here. What is that? It's white. Right? What's here right in the very middle? Neutral middle gray. Does it make sense to you guys what's going on here? This becomes critical, the idea of color as location. So it is 3-dimensional. You need 3 dimensions to describe that. You can see this little spot that's right here. It's defined by its RGB location values. Again, it's a red of 51. Now red is the axis that's coming out here. 51 out of 255 is not that much. So you can see I'm not coming out that far. Green, it's kind of the middle green, and you can see the green again is the height of this. And this thing is about halfway up. So that 153, it's kind of close. It's about halfway. And then the blue, the axis for the blue, is coming out here. And you can see it's almost all the way out to the far edge. That's why it's a 204 out of 255. This 3 numbers describe that location exactly. And that location is not ambiguous. It's unambiguous. It will always be that color by its location. Does that make sense? All right. There's a unique peach color. Everyone is defined. However, it does not need to be primaries. HSB, which you guys have worked with some, I'm sure every person in this room has put on a hue saturation curve, it's adjustment layer at some point, right? So you're working with the shit. How many people in here can tell me what hue is? You work with the shit and you have no idea. Like a what?
A variant of the same color, or different, like a
It's the problem that we all have, right? What's saturation? We all think we know. We sort of know what it does. We need to be more explicit about that. So at any rate, I need everybody, again, and I apologize to the Windows people, I'm so sorry. This doesn't exist. This is a Macintosh program at all, but at least you'll be able to see it. And I promise you, if you want to, at some point, I'll let you borrow my computer and you can get stoned and go home and do this. But for the rest of you, I need you to go out to your Finder. I need you to go to your Application folder. I need you to scroll down to your Utilities folder. And I need you to find in there the Color Sync utility. Right here, sorry. Color Sync utility, and open this guy up. When it opens up, there's a series of tabs along the top. Do not select the first one, which is Profile First Aid. It's the second one, which is Profiles. If you click on that, your screen will look your options will be different than mine because I have a lot of other profiles installed in mine. But if you click the drop-down, open up system part for under the profile sidebar and click on Adobe RGB, you will actually get a three-dimensional representation of what the Adobe RGB color space looks like. And if you click on it and you actually spin it around like this, you can actually see exactly how this space is constructed and what it actually looks like. And if you get really stoned and put on Pink Floyd, you can do this for hours. But no, I'm just kidding. This is a true color space. It's a three-dimensional color space. This is exactly what I was talking to you guys about. Why do you use Adobe RGB? Well, let me show you why you use Adobe RGB. If you've actually got this space open, you'll see that there's a little triangle in the very top left-hand corner. Click on that and come down and say hold for comparison. And that space will actually gray out. And then if you look in your system profiles, there is another color space, sRGB. And if you click on that, it will actually show you the sRGB color space that's sitting inside the Adobe RGB color space. So you remember I told you that without those warnings that you could take your beautiful camera file, which is larger than Adobe RGB actually, and bring that into Photoshop and not realize that it was going to convert it to sRGB. All of this color that's been ghosted out, that's gray here, is thrown away, and you don't know it, and they don't tell you. That was worth showing up today alone. If you never come back to this class, at least you will not be fucking up your files as bad as you possibly could. Is that surprising to any of you? This is a train wreck.
Why do they make that the default on?
They got true story, they got together with Microsoft back in the 1990s, and Microsoft said, we want your default color space to be the average of a used 13-inch tube monitor. That's the color space we want to be the default. And I don't know who they slept with or who they paid or how much they paid, but Adobe said, okay, and it's stayed that way to this day. And it's horrible. At any rate. Fun, right? Okay, let me get back to this. We don't have too much longer to go, guys. I know it's been a long day. Believe me, it gets better. Okay, so we've gone through that. Okay, so then let's talk about what hue, saturation, and brightness really are. This is how we're going to end our day today. We're doing pretty well in time-wise. So hue, when I asked you guys what hue was, if we take a look at this, so hue is the property of a pure color that distinguishes it from another pure color. It's the thing that gives us red, green, yellow, cyan, those terms. If you take a look at what we had on the color wheel, hue is defined by degrees. Remember, we started at 0 degrees. Red was at the 3 o'clock. Green was at 120. Cyan was at 180, the exact opposite of red, et cetera, et cetera. All of these dots right here, they have the exact same saturation and the exact same brightness. The only thing that is different in these is the hue. Saturation. Saturation, on one extreme we have a pure color, on the other extreme we have completely neutral gray. In this example right here, the hue remains the same, the brightness remains the same, the only thing that is changing is the saturation. We're starting here with the purest color of red, and as we start to add cyan to it, it ends up moving to ultimately being a neutral color when we have equal amounts of those two mixed together. Make sense? So again, it's controlled by subtracting or adding that complementary color. And then finally, brightness. And brightness is the hardest one for most people. Brightness is the property by which your color appears to contain more or less light. So in the case of this, it's all the same hue, it's all the same saturation. The only thing that is changing here is the brightness. We start with the purest, most brightest, what we would consider to be the color that defines red. And as we start reducing the brightness, we actually start moving to black. And you saw that happening when we were actually playing with that column slider and moving it up and down. We were doing exactly what we are looking at right here. Right? So let's look at that really quickly. Go back into Photoshop. Click on the foreground color picker. Click on red to actually make that column the red tab. Make sure that you've got zeros for all your RGB values. And then simply click and drag this up. That's exactly what we are talking about in terms of doing brightness. That is the only thing that's actually changing here. The saturation and the color are identical. Oh, I know what. Yeah, okay, this is going to be good. We might go a couple of minutes late, but not that much. So, the issue that we've got here, so we've gotten through hue, saturation, and brightness, and we come back to the color wheel. So, the color wheel here, again, is described exactly the way we were talking about, but what's missing in this is the brightness element of it. So, to fix that, what they do is they flop the color wheel on its side, and then they add the third dimension. In the third dimension, if you imagine this is the equator, saturation works from the center of the Earth out to the very edge of the Earth. Brightness is from the North Pole to the South Pole. This would go up to white and this would go down to black. Does that make sense, everybody, what we just did? We've added the third dimension to give us brightness, because again, you have to have three dimensions. You've got hue, saturation, brightness. They each one need a dimension to actually have them do that. So I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to do a quick little exercise. And this will be the last thing that we do here. So I need all of you to go to the, oh, did the thumb drive go around? Did everybody get the files? All right, so for those of you who have the files, don't worry if you don't have the files, because this is going to go really quick, and this is how we're going to end the day right now, 5 minutes. I need you to go to the class files or student files 01, and inside there, there's going to be a redcar.psd. Can everybody find that? Who has the files? In week 1. Yes? Double click on it and open it up. Red car, right? Does everybody have the red car? Anybody not? All right, guys, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to turn that car green. Hang on 1 second. Ready? Go. All right, 1 minute's up. Thirty seconds left. Time's up. How do we do? So take a look. Green car, how'd you do it? Hue, saturation, brightness. Didn't have the file yet, I understand that. Still looking for the file. Not really that close.
No.
Just kidding. How'd you do it? Yes, hue, saturation, brightness, right? Hue, saturation, brightness, probably how most of you guys did it, right? I need somebody to time me, please. Okay, I'm ready. Just somebody say go, but somebody get a timer on it. We'll see how long it takes.
3, 2, 1.
Stop.
15 seconds.
How long?
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm going to outpace you guys when we actually get the retouching job. I'll bid it. I'll bid it for your 2 minutes, and I'll do it in 15 and make 4 times the money. So the reason I do this is to try to impress upon you the importance of understanding color theory. I want you to know what I just did and how I just did that. But we've got to start with the basics. We've got to start with RGB and then move to HSB, and then we will move to LAB, which is where this is at. But I do this because I know that I always feel this way about the first class here in retouching. It's just like, my sense is that you're thinking, what the fuck did I get into? This is not what I signed up for. Believe me, I can change so much of the way you guys do this. This will be, I can't encourage you enough to stick this out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Are there any questions about any of this so far today? All right, next week we'll finish up a little bit. We didn't quite finish color, but we were really close to finishing that part of it. There's another little part element that we'll get into. But next week we will also get into our color managed workflow. We will be doing sensor profiles for our cameras. We will be doing monitor calibration. We will be going through all of that part of it all. And then we'll actually start working on dodging and burning files the right way next week. Yes?
So bring our camera?
You do not need to bring your camera. What you could do is, if you want to, how many, and again, guys, we're done for the day, so if you've got to run, you go ahead and run. But how many of you guys actually have a copy of this color checker, passport color checker, in any file that is from your camera? If you don't worry. I'm going to get one of these into your hands so that you can. But you need a photograph of this done with your camera in order to calibrate your camera. So we'll talk about that next week. And I've got a working file, so you don't need to worry about it. So no, the answer is no, you do not need to bring your camera next week. Are there any questions about any of this stuff that we went through? Are we good on this? Okay, I'll see you guys next week. Oh, so the assignment, for what it's worth, was introduce yourself. There's one of those assignments. Think about your workspace and your setup. I was going to say calibrate your monitor. You can't do that, but start working on the color primer reader part, and I'll see you guys next week. Oh, and whoever's got the thumb drive with the assignment files, can we continue to pass that around? If you haven't gotten it yet, if you could stay, but if somebody's finished with it, hold it up in the air so the next person can get it. If any of the Macintosh people didn't get it all, they can also get it off. They're the same files. They'll work for either Windows or Macintosh. It doesn't matter. Oh, do you want to? Yeah, we should talk about when we're going to do the hard drive. So for those of you who couldn't get your hard drive to show up as a scratch disk, you want to meet here an hour early next week?
Yeah.
Anybody else up on that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Is that okay? All right.